Hello, everyone. So today our group is analyzing a People's Magazine article about the actress Sophie Turner and her experiences with anxiety, depression, and bulimia. So first we will talk about the summary, then the background of the disorder, followed by social perspective, and then biological perspective, then uh, psychological perspective, then ethics, then recommendations of how to deal with this disorder. So, this article explains that she used to isolate herself when she felt anxious or depressed, sometimes for days at a time or weeks at a time. However, she now manages these feelings through therapy and like social support and healthier coping strategies like reaching out to friends and family. So overall, this article presents a hopeful message that recovery is possible. While this can help reduce stigma, it gives a very little clinical explanation of the disorder itself. And this is the main issue that we will be discussing in this presentation. So this article highlights the three connected mental issues. So firstly, anxiety, which Turner describes as feeling overwhelmed and triggered. Secondly, depression, which is shown through her withdrawal from other long periods of low mood. And then finally, this article describes bulimia, that explains her eating difficulties, and it became worse during periods of poor mental health. So although this article promotes therapy and social support, it doesn't really explain how these disorders develop or how serious they can be. This creates a simplified picture of a very complex and very long illness to treat. So the background of the disorder. So our main focus is bulimia, and it's only a specific disorder mentioned in this article. So bulimia is a serious eating disorder that involves repeated binge eatings followed by behavior to overreact, often alongside feelings of shame and poor body image. Researchers also show that bulimia commonly occurs alongside anxiety and depression the most, which is known as comorbidity, and this is reflected in Turner's experience, where emotional distress and eating difficulties are closely connected. So looking at this article through a biopsychological perspective, it helps understand that recovery is influenced by a biological perspective and a psychological perspective, of course, and a social factor. And it's not just a personal choice or willpower. So even if it does look simple, it's not, and there's a lot of things that are not shown in the surface level. So now that we have discussed the background of the disorder, and I have introduced this article and disorder, I will hand over the next speaker who will examine the social aspects of this disorder.
For the social perspective, I will try to explain Sophie Turner's symptoms by looking at how the external systemic pressures shaped her mental health rather than focusing on the internal brain chemistry or her genetics. The etiology or the reasons behind her symptoms can be the constant stress she is under by the media, the stress to look a certain way, behave in a certain manner. I think we all know for celebrities, especially celebrities that happen to be women, even the tiniest mistake, like accidentally tripping over the dress, will be plastered all over social media, probably within the hour. So everyone is talking about her recent divorce, making their own speculations about it, about whose fault it was. On top of that, she has two toddlers, so she's balancing motherhood along with a demanding career and life in general. This results in her feeling depressed, anxious, overwhelmed, and developing an eating disorder. She sought treatment through peer support and therapy. Turner said that she used to have week-long ruts isolating herself, but now, after consistently doing therapy, she always makes sure to call up one of her friends whenever she's feeling overwhelmed or anxious. Along with that, she mentioned how becoming a mother has changed the way she thinks about her own self-worth. She said that her kids gave her a whole new lease on life and wellness. She said how she wants her body to be around as long as possible so that she can spend time with her kids for as long as possible.
Hello, my name is Kenza and I will be focusing on a certain predisposition of the eating disorder, which is depression, and explain how Sophie Turner's eating disorder is comorbid alongside anxiety. Although the article has not mentioned the biological background of the depressive disorders, the use of extensive literature helps understand how relevant Sophie Turner's depressive symptoms are to the actual diagnosis. The etiology of depressive disorders are shown to result from a dysfunction in the neurotransmitter system, specifically the 5-HTTLPT gene. This is the serotonin gene, which regulates mood, sleep, motivation, and other critical bodily functions. A shorter allele of this gene is highly correlated with lower serotonin reuptake in the brain synapses, therefore leading to depression. Symptoms from the DSM-5 include persistent sadness or low mood for most of the day, poor appetite, low energy or fatigue, and insomnia. Sophie Turner had only described going through long periods of social isolation when she is in an incredibly low, persistent mood. Therefore, it is not enough to describe Sophie Turner's condition in terms of relevance to the depressive disorders. The article does not provide a complete biological overview of Sophie Turner's depressive symptoms. Furthermore, the article had not outlined any kind of biological treatment options either, but treating depression consists of antidepressants such as SSRIs to increase serotonin reuptake. The psychological etiology of depression is linked to the psychoanalytic theories. These theories propose that the onset of depression comes from the shattering of an individual's ideals and beliefs. For example, disruption in childhood experiences can increase vulnerability to depression. To elaborate, these traumatic events can create a system of negative beliefs about the self, the world, and the future, feeling trapped in an endless cycle of negative emotional states. This in turn materializes into symptoms such as feelings of hopelessness and low self esteem. However, the way to treat this condition is CBT, which is used to provide psychoeducation about the condition and teach realistic thinking skills to change the client's belief systems. Furthermore, Sophie Turner describes how she uses the tapping method. In other words, it is called the emotional freedom technique, which contributes to the psychological and somatic approaches in reducing depression. This entails that Sophie Turner has been implementing one form of psychological treatment for depression, and it is safe to assume that she has been receiving a degree of psychoeducation about her mental health conditions as well. While Turner exhibits many symptoms of depression, it is not reported in the article how long the client has been suffering from it. The criteria for persistent depressive disorder in the DSM-5 mention that symptoms need to be present for around 2 years, yet information on how long Sophie Turner had been suffering from mental health issues is not revealed in the article. Moreover, the reason dysthymia was picked to describe Sophie Turner's condition was due to the accurate match of symptoms, whereas other depressive disorders, such as major depressive disorder, additionally include suicidal symptoms. This entails that if Turner was undergoing major depressive disorder, then thoughts of suicide would have been brought to attention and discussed in the article. Moreover, the popular actress who had been exposed to high levels of fame could mean a lack of privacy for herself and her family, which is a major risk factor that could suggest the development of anxiety symptoms. Early traumatic life experiences are known to foster these beliefs into increased focus on events and inaccurate representations about the self that are out of the person's control. In the case of Sophie Turner, her background and involvement with the Hollywood industry are good indicators of encountering unpredictable events. The symptom of depression in terms of negative beliefs about the world and the system can increase the development of anxiety, meaning it would entail constant negative thoughts leading to overwhelming feelings, as mentioned in the article. Symptoms such as decreased self-worth can also fuel anxiety due to the constant exposure to the public eye, therefore serving as an additional reason to avoid it, causing the individual to go into isolation. These thoughts can also lead to avoidant behavior in response to aversive stimuli, which reinforces the anxious beliefs. Next, Sophie Turner described how motherhood showed her the importance of health and her body image for her kids. Therefore, this brings up the linkage to other disorders such as anxiety and depression, which can act as a predisposition or primary disorder for eating disorders. The criteria in the DSM-5 state that the symptoms for bulimia nervosa, recurrent episodes of binging and purging, and for anorexia, symptoms include restriction of energy intake from food and supplements. If it were to diagnose Sophie Turner with an eating disorder, anorexia would be the most fitting, as the article describes the actress going into long periods without eating. However, the reason that it is not possible to categorize Sophie Turner's eating issues as a separate disorder is that the symptoms, loss of appetite, already exists as a criterion of most depressive disorders. Therefore, it is suggested to focus on Sophie Turner's eating disorder issues from the depressive disorder lens.
Today, I will be talking about the issues in the article about Sophie Turner and her experiences with anxiety and depression using the APS Code of Ethics. The thing is, mental health is a personal and sensitive topic. When someone like Sophie Turner, who is a celebrity, shares her struggles, it can really help people feel more comfortable talking about their issues. At the same time, it raises some concerns about how the media talks about this stuff and whether they are being responsible. The big ethical issue here is finding a balance between raising awareness about health and protecting Sophie Turner's dignity and well being. The first important principle from the APS Code of Ethics is respect. This means respecting people's right, dignity, and privacy. Even though Sophie Turner chose to share her story, the media still has to be careful about how they present it and not take advantage of her vulnerability just to get attention. The second principle is propriety. This is about the promoting well-being and avoiding harm. When the media talks about health, they should try to educate people, but they should not make it sound simpler than it is or give wrong information about conditions like anxiety and depression. This could make people misunderstand these issues. Another important principle is confidentiality. Even though Sophie Turner shared her story publicly, her personal information should still be handled carefully. The media should not take her words out of context, repeat them too much in a way that could hurt her. The last principle is integrity. This means being honest and accurate. The media has to make sure they present Sophie Turner's experiences truthfully and do not exaggerate or make them sound more exciting than they are. For example, the article says that talking to friends can sometimes make Sophie Turner feel quickly. While this might be true for her, it could also give people the idea that the mental health issues are easy to fix, which is not true for everyone. This is a problem because it could confuse people or make them think mental health conditions are not a big deal. To handle this issue in a way, the media should present the mental health stories in a balanced and accurate way. They should not make a deal out of personal experiences and instead focus on helping people understand and be aware of mental health. It is also important to tell people to seek help rather than suggesting that simple solutions work for everyone. In conclusion, even though Sophie Turner being open about her struggles can have effects and help reduce stigma, her story has to be handled carefully. By following the APS principles of respect, propriety, confidentiality, and integrity, the media can make sure that the mental health is talked about in an ethical way.
Hello, I am Zahra and I will be speaking about 4 recommendations that can improve this article. First, we recommend briefly explaining the disorders mentioned in the article. People.com uses terms like anxiety, depression, and bulimia without giving any background. This can lead to misunderstanding or oversimplification. Even one sentence can help readers understand what these conditions actually involve. For example, saying that anxiety often includes persistent worry and physical tension, while depression can involve low mood fatigue or withdrawal from daily activities. Bulimia involves a cycle of overeating followed by compensatory behavior usually linked to emotional distress. Providing this context helps avoid stigma because readers can see these conditions as real recognized psychological experiences rather than dramatic labels. Second, the article mentions several coping techniques, tapping, box breathing, and exposure therapy, but doesn't explain them. A simple clarification would make the article more educational and reduce confusion. For example, Box breathing is a slow breathing pattern that helps calm the nervous system. Tapping is a grounding technique used to reduce anxiety, and exposure therapy involves gradually facing uncomfortable feelings instead of avoiding them. Explaining these briefly raises awareness of healthy coping tools and shows readers that evidence based strategies exist. Third, this article relies entirely on Sophie's personal story. Adding even one statistic such as affects more than 300 million people worldwide helps readers understand that Sophie's experience is not isolated. This reduces overgeneralization and also reduces stigma by showing that mental health challenges are common and widely recognized. It also supports public awareness by connecting her story to a larger mental health context. Finally, we recommend reducing emotionally loaded or sensational language. The article uses phrases like dark path, ruts, and bad headspace. This kind of language can unintentionally dramatize mental illness and reinforce stereotypes. Replacing these with more neutral phrasing supports a more respectful portrayal. It also helps readers focus on the experience rather than the intensity of the wording. Overall, these changes would make the article more accurate, more responsible in how it portrays mental health, and more supportive for readers who may relate to Sophie's experience. That's all. Thank you.
These are our references. Thank you.